1884, Blackthorn Vale, North Yorkshire, England. Autumn rain drifted across the ancient hills while Blackwood Manor stood above its villages like a watchful king. Inside its stone walls, Duke Adrian Blackwood, 36, carried the reputation of a man who never forgave betrayal. Parliament respected his brilliance, rivals feared his resolve, and servants whispered that grief had frozen every warm corner of his heart. None remembered the smiling young nobleman he had once been before politics, ambition, and bloodshed reshaped him. Only one woman still saw the gentle soul hidden beneath the iron mask. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, 25, remained the single light capable of reaching him. Eleanor possessed quiet grace rather than dazzling pride. Her smile welcomed strangers, her kindness steadied frightened children, and her compassion softened Adrian's darkest moods. 2 years earlier, assassins had ambushed their carriage on a lonely road. Eleanor had thrown herself between Adrian and a charging horse after the driver was shot. The violent crash shattered her left leg beyond repair, leaving her dependent upon polished wooden crutches. Adrian survived because she accepted pain without hesitation. Since that day he had loved her with deeper devotion than words could express, never allowing anyone to mock her disability or question her place beside him. Their greatest blessing arrived 8 months before autumn. Little Theodore, rosy-cheeked and endlessly curious, filled the manor with laughter that servants claimed even echoed through empty corridors after sunset. Adrian held his son every morning before attending Parliament, while Eleanor sang gentle lullabies beside nursery windows overlooking the misty fields. For a brief season, happiness seemed stronger than old wounds. Yet peace invited envy. Adrian's uncle, Lord Cedric Hawthorne, 61, had spent decades smiling politely while secretly resenting the Blackwood line. Behind polished manners lived relentless ambition. Hidden estate records revealed Ravenmoor Estate contained an immense underground spring capable of transforming northern agriculture. Cedric wanted that forgotten land and everything connected to it. Eleanor's influence over Adrian stood between him and absolute control. Anonymous letters began arriving without signatures. They claimed Eleanor secretly exchanged messages with Adrian's political enemies. Missing account books mysteriously reappeared bearing forged initials. Trusted servants vanished overnight before they could answer questions. Witnesses appeared claiming they had seen Eleanor meeting suspicious strangers beneath moonlit trees. Every accusation seemed independent, yet together they formed an impossible web. Adrian refused to believe the first letters. He burned them without reading every page. The second bundle troubled him. The third included documents carrying Eleanor's forged signature beside promises of confidential information. His advisors urged caution. Newspapers hinted that someone within Blackwood Manor endangered national stability. Parliament watched closely, waiting for weakness. Unable to silence the growing storm, Adrian confronted Eleanor privately inside the library where their wedding portrait still hung above the fireplace. She looked at him with wounded surprise before calmly denying every accusation. She reminded him she had sacrificed her own future to save his life. Tears shimmered inside her eyes, yet her voice never rose above a whisper. She asked him for trust instead of sympathy. Adrian wanted nothing more than to believe her. Every memory insisted she spoke the truth. Every forged document insisted otherwise. As husband, his heart reached toward her. As duke, his duty demanded unquestioned honor. Cedric quietly encouraged the council to insist upon a public judgment before scandal consumed the duchy. The great hall overflowed with nobles, servants, reporters, and anxious citizens when Adrian finally appeared. Eleanor entered on her crutches wearing a cream traveling dress and carrying Theodore against her chest. Silence spread through the chamber like winter frost. Adrian's expression revealed nothing, although his hands trembled behind his back. With unbearable slowness he announced that the evidence declared Lady Eleanor guilty of conspiring against the House of Blackwood. Horrified whispers swept across the hall. Eleanor stared at him, searching desperately for the husband who had once promised never to abandon her. Instead she found only the distant face of England's most feared duke. Adrian stepped forward and gently lifted Theodore from her arms. The infant reached toward his mother, crying with frightened confusion. Eleanor balanced unsteadily upon her crutches and pleaded for one final kiss. She asked for nothing else. No pardon. No title. Only a mother's goodbye. Pain flashed across Adrian's face before discipline buried it again. He whispered that he could not grant even that mercy because weakness before the court would destroy everything his family protected. Theodore continued stretching tiny hands toward Eleanor while tears streamed down her cheeks. Adrian declared that Lady Eleanor Blackwood would be banished immediately to Ravenmoor Estate, describing it as the most worthless land the Blackwoods owned. Gasps echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Cedric lowered his head to hide a satisfied smile. As the carriage rolled away from Blackwood Manor, Adrian remained alone inside the deserted Great Hall long after everyone else departed. Theodore finally stopped crying and fell asleep against his shoulder, clutching the edge of his father's coat with impossibly small fingers. Adrian stared at the closed doors through which Eleanor had disappeared, feeling every heartbeat like another accusation. He convinced himself that sacrificing his happiness protected the duchy, yet the victory tasted like ashes. Somewhere beyond the rain his wife believed he had chosen power instead of love. He silently vowed to uncover the complete truth, even if it condemned him more harshly than any court ever could. Outside, church bells echoed across soaked valleys while ravens circled the gray sky. Neither husband nor wife realized the conspiracy had only begun, and every mile between them strengthened Cedric's dangerous confidence. Hours later a lonely carriage carried Eleanor through relentless rain toward the abandoned estate. Broken cottages emerged from the darkness beside poisoned fields, collapsed bridges, and a silent manor swallowed by ivy. Standing beneath the storm with her crutches sinking into mud, she surveyed the forgotten land, steadied her trembling breath and whispered, "If this place still breathes, then so will I." Behind the empty windows, unseen eyes watched her arrival. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky, revealing Ravenmoor Estate without the mercy of darkness. The manor's cracked stone walls stood wrapped in thorn-covered vines, shattered windows stared like empty eyes, and every neglected path disappeared beneath weeds taller than Eleanor's waist. The silence felt unnatural until a distant child began coughing somewhere among the ruined cottages. Instead of sounding cursed, the land sounded abandoned, forgotten by everyone except those too poor to leave. Leaning firmly upon her crutches, Eleanor crossed the muddy courtyard toward the nearest cottage. Rainwater dripped through its broken roof into rusted cooking pots while thin blankets hung beside a fireplace long deprived of wood. An elderly widow greeted her with frightened eyes, believing another noble had arrived only to demand unpaid taxes. Eleanor quietly introduced herself without mentioning her title. When she learned the widow had not eaten since the previous morning, she emptied the last provisions from her own traveling basket and insisted they share breakfast together. News of the stranger's kindness spread quickly through the scattered settlement. By afternoon, 12 families cautiously gathered outside the manor, their faces carrying equal measures of curiosity and hopelessness. They expected speeches or commands. Instead, Eleanor asked every household to tell their story before she offered a single suggestion. One father had lost 3 children to fever after the village well collapsed beneath fallen stone. Another family survived each winter inside a cottage whose roof threatened to collapse with every snowfall. An aging miller confessed the watermill had stopped turning nearly 30 years earlier, leaving everyone dependent upon costly flour hauled from distant towns. None spoke of monsters or ghosts. Every tragedy had a painfully ordinary explanation. That evening Eleanor explored the neglected estate with a lantern swinging gently beside her. Beyond the abandoned orchard she discovered rows of apple trees still alive beneath tangled branches. Their trunks remained healthy despite years of neglect. She smiled softly, realizing living roots waited patiently beneath every appearance of death. The estate had never lost its strength. It had simply been denied care. The following morning she called the villagers together outside the silent manor. Rather than promising miracles, she proposed small victories. They would repair one leaking roof before winter. They would clear one blocked footpath. They would restore one abandoned garden. Hope, she told them, never arrived all at once. It grew through ordinary hands refusing to surrender. Despite constant pain in her injured leg, Eleanor worked beside everyone from sunrise until dusk. Children watched in amazement as a duchess carried broken stones while balancing carefully upon her crutches. Whenever she stumbled, someone rushed forward to steady her. Gradually embarrassment disappeared. The villagers no longer saw a disgraced noblewoman. They saw someone unwilling to ask another person to perform labor she would not attempt herself. When evenings arrived, Eleanor gathered children beneath the manor's surviving oak tree. Using charcoal upon smooth wooden boards, she taught them letters, numbers, and stories about courage. Their laughter slowly replaced the silence haunting Ravenmoor. Parents who had forgotten how to smile lingered nearby simply to hear joyful voices again. One rainy afternoon Eleanor wandered into the manor's abandoned library seeking dry firewood. Instead she uncovered dust-covered estate ledgers hidden beneath collapsed shelves. Inside rested faded maps showing irrigation channels carved generations earlier to protect the fields from flooding. Curious, she compared the maps with the surrounding landscape. Everywhere weeds concealed shallow ridges running toward the river. The next day she persuaded several villagers to begin clearing those forgotten channels. The work proved exhausting. Mud swallowed boots, stones resisted every effort, and cold rain soaked clothing until fingers became numb. Still they continued. Hours later, trapped floodwater suddenly rushed through the reopened passages with a powerful roar. The water flowed away from the fields instead of drowning them. Children cheered as stagnant pools disappeared before their eyes. Encouraged by success, the villagers tackled the clogged village well. Removing broken masonry took 3 full days, yet fresh water finally surged upward, sparkling beneath sunlight for the first time in years. Women filled clean buckets while elderly men removed their hats in silent gratitude. The simple miracle transformed daily life more deeply than anyone expected. Next came the abandoned watermill. Eleanor studied its warped mechanisms beside the old miller until they understood which beams required replacing. Carpenters volunteered salvaged timber from empty cottages. Blacksmiths repaired rusted iron fittings. Entire families gathered along the riverbank as the great wheel slowly turned once again. Its deep rhythmic creak echoed across Ravenmoor like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant awakening. Fresh flour filled the air with its comforting scent, and warm bread returned to every table before winter's arrival. Weeks became months. Roofs rose stronger than before. Vegetable gardens spread across land once choked by weeds. Blossoms appeared among the neglected orchards, followed by bees that had not visited for decades. Travelers passing nearby paused in astonishment, wondering why laughter echoed from a place every map described as cursed. The villagers gradually stopped calling their home Ravenmoor. Without ceremony or debate, children began referring to it as Hope's Valley, and adults quietly followed. Eleanor protested that she deserved no such honor, yet nobody listened. They insisted Hope had arrived wearing a simple cream dress, carrying wooden crutches instead of pride. Far away at Blackwood Manor, Adrian received the first monthly report describing repaired cottages and restored fields. Assuming the steward exaggerated, he dismissed it. The second report documented increased harvests despite the estate's miserable reputation. The third announced the watermill had resumed operation, trade wagons had begun arriving, and abandoned orchards promised extraordinary yields. Adrian read every page twice, unable to reconcile those achievements with the broken wilderness where he had condemned Eleanor to disappear. One detail unsettled him above all others. Eleanor had requested neither money nor permission to return. She had sent no accusations, no pleas, and no demands. Every report mentioned only improvements benefiting the villagers. Long after midnight, Adrian folded the latest document, extinguished every candle except one, and quietly decided that only his own eyes could reveal whether Ravenmoor had truly become the impossible place everyone now whispered about. The following dawn arrived beneath clear autumn skies as Adrian Blackwood crossed the northern hills wearing a weathered brown coat instead of a duke's tailored garments. Dust covered his boots, a simple satchel rested across his shoulder, and his signet ring remained hidden inside his pocket. No guards rode beside him. No banners announced his name. For the first time in years, England's most powerful duke traveled as an ordinary stranger seeking answers no report could fully explain. As Ravenmoor appeared beyond the rolling hills, Adrian slowed his horse in astonishment. The estate he remembered as broken and forgotten had transformed into a living landscape overflowing with quiet industry. Golden wheat swayed across fields once buried beneath stagnant floodwater. Smoke curled peacefully from repaired chimneys. Freshly painted fences enclosed healthy livestock grazing contentedly. Children laughed beside crystal-clear streams where poisoned pools had once reflected only decay. Even the ancient watermill turned steadily beside the river, its rhythmic wheel singing a melody of rebirth. Nothing before him resembled the worthless wasteland he had condemned his wife to inhabit. He left his horse near the village square and entered on foot, introducing himself only as Andrew, a traveler searching for temporary work. Nobody questioned him. Instead, smiling villagers welcomed him with simple hospitality that wealth could never purchase. A baker handed him warm bread without asking for payment. An elderly carpenter pointed toward the communal workshop where everyone contributed according to ability rather than status. Adrian found himself accepted not because of power but because strangers believed helping another traveler required no reward. Curious voices suddenly gathered near the restored schoolhouse. Adrian followed the sound and stopped beneath an old oak tree, unable to breathe. Balanced carefully upon her familiar wooden crutches, Eleanor stood atop a repaired ladder while fastening fresh shingles onto the school roof. Her movements remained slow and deliberate, yet every motion carried quiet determination instead of frustration. Wind lifted loose curls around her face as sunlight illuminated features softened by compassion rather than bitterness. Whenever someone offered unnecessary assistance, she thanked them warmly before insisting another villager needed stronger hands more urgently. She looked thinner than before her banishment, yet somehow stronger. A little girl below accidentally dropped a basket of nails across the grass. Before anyone else reacted, Eleanor descended awkwardly, knelt despite obvious pain, and gathered every scattered nail beside the child. Instead of scolding her, Eleanor smiled gently. Mistakes become lessons only when kindness follows them. The frightened child smiled through tears before hugging Eleanor around the waist. Adrian quietly turned away, overwhelmed by shame. Later that afternoon he joined several men repairing damaged fences bordering the orchards. Though unused to manual labor, Adrian worked without complaint, earning approving nods from weathered farmers who believed him an ordinary traveler. Splinters blistered his hands, muscles ached beneath unfamiliar strain, yet every completed fence somehow eased a small corner of his restless conscience. During their work an elderly farmer spoke proudly about Lady Eleanor. When she arrived, the old man said, "We expected another noble waiting to escape. Instead she carried stones with us while standing on those crutches. She never asked why misfortune found her. She only asked what needed repairing first." Another villager laughed softly. "She fixed more broken hearts than broken roofs." Those simple words lingered inside Adrian long after conversation ended. That evening children gathered beneath the great oak for lessons. Adrian remained hidden nearby, listening quietly. Eleanor read aloud from an old history book before asking every child to describe what courage meant. Their answers ranged from soldiers defending kingdoms to mothers feeding hungry families. Finally one small orphan boy raised his hand. "Courage is Lady Eleanor." The others nodded immediately. The boy continued, "She came here with nothing except sadness. Then she gave us everything she still had." Adrian lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. When lessons ended, Eleanor remained beneath the fading sunlight organizing donated books inside wooden shelves. She paused briefly, touching the wedding ring still resting upon her finger. Her expression carried sadness, yet no resentment. One curious girl asked the question every villager secretly wondered. "Do you still love the Duke?" Silence settled across the schoolyard. Eleanor looked toward distant hills glowing beneath sunset. "I pray for him every evening." The children stared in surprise. "Even after everything?" She smiled with quiet gentleness. "Bitterness grows nothing." Those 3 words struck Adrian harder than any accusation ever could. That night sleep refused him. Restless thoughts drove him through the abandoned western wing of the old manor where repairs had not yet begun. Lantern light flickered across collapsed corridors until he noticed unusual markings carved beneath loose foundation stones inside the former estate office. Curiosity overcame exhaustion. Removing several damaged stones revealed a narrow compartment untouched for generations. Inside rested waterproof leather cases containing estate maps, engineering drawings, financial ledgers, and official documents bearing ancient Blackwood seals. Adrian's heartbeat quickened. Spreading the maps across a dusty table, he recognized detailed surveys describing an enormous underground spring stretching beneath nearly every acre of Ravenmoor. Engineers had concluded decades earlier that the spring possessed enough fresh water to irrigate thousands of surrounding acres, making Ravenmoor potentially the richest agricultural estate in northern England. Additional documents recorded deliberate orders preventing development. Those orders carried Cedric Hawthorne's signature. Adrian searched further. Secret correspondence described plans to allow Ravenmoor's reputation to collapse until its value disappeared completely. Once abandoned, Cedric intended quietly transferring ownership through hidden financial arrangements before revealing its extraordinary resources for personal fortune. Every disaster had been engineered. Every neglected repair had served calculated greed. Hands trembling, Adrian opened the final ledger. Inside rested copies of anonymous letters identical to those accusing Eleanor of treason. Beside each draft appeared careful instructions detailing forged handwriting samples, bribed witnesses, missing account books, and fabricated evidence prepared months before Eleanor's public trial. Cedric had orchestrated every lie from the beginning. The truth became horrifyingly clear. Eleanor had sacrificed her leg to save Adrian's life. She had accepted exile without hatred. She had transformed hopelessness into prosperity. And throughout every injustice she had remained completely innocent. Unable to stand beneath the crushing weight of realization, Adrian stumbled into the manor chapel where moonlight poured through broken stained glass windows onto the cracked stone floor. Kneeling before the neglected altar, he finally allowed years of discipline to collapse. Tears he had denied since Eleanor's banishment flowed freely through trembling hands. He remembered refusing her final kiss with Theodore, remembered the terror inside her eyes, remembered convincing himself duty demanded cruelty. Every memory now returned sharpened by unbearable truth. When dawn finally touched the chapel windows, Adrian rose carrying every recovered document inside his satchel. Outside, Hope's Valley awakened with birdsong, turning water wheels and children's laughter born from the woman he had failed beyond measure. Before mounting his horse, he looked once more toward the schoolyard where Eleanor greeted each villager with the same quiet grace she had once offered him. She never saw him disappear beyond the hills. Clutched tightly inside his satchel lay enough evidence to destroy Cedric Hawthorne forever, yet Adrian understood exposing one villain would never erase the greatest crime already written across his own heart. Morning mist still clung to the Yorkshire hills when Adrian Blackwood rode through the gates of Blackwood Manor, carrying the leather satchel that now weighed more heavily than any crown. Inside rested the hidden ledgers, forged letters, engineering maps, and secret correspondence that shattered every lie surrounding Eleanor's banishment. He had left Hope's Valley believing he understood justice. He returned knowing justice would first demand the public destruction of his own pride. Without resting, Adrian summoned the Privy Council, senior magistrates, influential members of Parliament, and every advisor who had witnessed Eleanor's condemnation. Official notices spread across London and Yorkshire with astonishing speed. Rumors filled newspapers before sunset. Some expected a political announcement. Others anticipated another treason trial. Nobody imagined the Duke intended to place himself beneath judgment alongside the true criminal. Lord Cedric Hawthorne entered the parliamentary chamber wearing confident elegance. His silver hair remained perfectly groomed, his tailored coat immaculate, and his smile carried effortless superiority. He believed Adrian had finally uncovered Ravenmoor's growing prosperity and wished to discuss reclaiming the estate. Several nobles even congratulated Cedric before proceedings began, unaware they welcomed a man standing upon the edge of ruin. The vast chamber fell silent when Adrian stepped forward alone. He wore formal black mourning clothes rather than ceremonial robes, silently acknowledging that truth often arrived dressed for grief. Instead of sitting upon the elevated ducal chair, he remained standing before everyone else. That single gesture unsettled the audience more than any speech could have accomplished. He began without theatrical anger. Calmly, deliberately, he described Eleanor's sacrifice during the carriage attack that had permanently crippled her leg while saving his life. He admitted she had never once sought recognition for her courage. Then he recounted the anonymous accusations, missing records, fabricated witnesses, and evidence that had convinced him his beloved wife betrayed both marriage and nation. Every face remained fixed upon him. Finally Adrian opened the satchel. One by one he placed the recovered documents across the long oak table. Ancient estate surveys revealed Ravenmoor's immense underground spring. Financial ledgers recorded decades of concealed theft. Drafts of anonymous letters matched the accusations delivered before Eleanor's trial. Handwriting comparisons exposed deliberate forgery. Hidden payment lists identified servants bribed into false testimony. Each document strengthened the next until coincidence became impossible and conspiracy undeniable. Cedric's smile disappeared. The Lord Chancellor personally examined the seals before inviting handwriting experts to compare signatures. Experienced clerks confirmed that Eleanor's supposed correspondence had been expertly imitated using practice sheets recovered from Cedric's hidden compartment. Bank officials identified transfers rewarding false witnesses through secret accounts controlled by Cedric's estate manager. Former servants, promised immunity for truthful testimony, stepped forward trembling yet determined. They confessed receiving money to hide account books, replace genuine letters, and spread poisonous rumors throughout Blackwood Manor. Gasps echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Cedric attempted denial, accusing Adrian of manufacturing evidence to recover family honor. His voice sounded confident until the estate steward from Ravenmoor entered carrying one final ledger discovered behind the manor chapel wall after Adrian's departure. Inside rested Cedric's personal instructions describing every stage of the conspiracy, including the exact day Eleanor would be publicly condemned and Ravenmoor permanently abandoned before its priceless resources could be secretly claimed. Silence followed. Even Cedric understood the game had ended. The judges unanimously declared every accusation against Eleanor fraudulent. Cedric Hawthorne was stripped of every noble title, every estate, every parliamentary privilege and every financial holding connected to the Blackwood family. Royal officers removed his ceremonial sword before escorting him from the chamber in disgrace. No noble spoke in his defense. The man who had manipulated kingdoms left surrounded only by shame. Yet Adrian remained motionless. Justice against Cedric brought no peace. He slowly faced the assembled nobles whose whispers had once fueled suspicion against Eleanor. "My uncle deceived this kingdom," he said quietly, "but I deceived the woman who trusted me most." No one interrupted. "I believed documents instead of devotion. I believed fear instead of faith. The only innocent person throughout this tragedy was my wife." Several ladies lowered their eyes. Older peers who had applauded Eleanor's exile removed their hats in silent regret. Newspapers printed Adrian's confession before dawn. Across England, readers awakened to astonishing headlines declaring Lady Eleanor Blackwood completely innocent. Churches mentioned her endurance during Sunday prayers. Villages repeated stories describing the crippled Duchess who transformed a forgotten wasteland into Hope's Valley while refusing bitterness against the husband who condemned her. Public opinion shifted with breathtaking force. Those who once mocked her disability now praised her resilience. Those who admired Adrian's stern judgment now pitied the unbearable cost of his mistake. Adrian ignored every invitation to celebrate Cedric's downfall. Instead, he entered Theodore's nursery alone. The little boy, now stronger and nearly 2 years old, recognized his father immediately and reached upward with joyful laughter. Adrian lifted him gently, overcome by the painful realization that mother and son had lost irreplaceable months because he lacked courage to question convenient lies. Theodore innocently touched Adrian's cheek before pointing toward Eleanor's painted portrait hanging above the fireplace. "Mama," the child whispered. The simple word pierced Adrian more deeply than any accusation. He packed no royal escort, no musicians, and no ceremonial procession. Carrying Theodore himself, he departed Blackwood Manor before sunrise with only one trusted groom following at a respectful distance. Throughout the journey, Adrian rehearsed countless apologies, yet every sentence sounded painfully inadequate. Some wounds demanded more than eloquent words. They demanded changed lives. By late afternoon, Hope's Valley shimmered beneath golden autumn light. Children chased one another between restored orchards while the watermill turned steadily beside the sparkling river. Villagers paused as the unfamiliar carriage approached, curiosity replacing caution. Adrian stepped down, holding Theodore securely against his chest. No duke's pride remained upon his face, only quiet humility shaped by remorse. Across the orchard, Eleanor stood supervising workers gathering ripe apples into woven baskets. She looked up and recognized Adrian instantly. Time seemed to freeze around them. Her gaze shifted to Theodore, and every buried emotion flooded across her face before years of heartbreak forced her to turn away. Believing forgiveness impossible, she quietly began walking toward the far end of the orchard. Then Theodore suddenly stretched both tiny arms toward her, leaned desperately from Adrian's embrace, and cried with all the longing hidden inside his little heart, "Mama!" Eleanor stopped walking, but she did not turn around. The word "Mama" floated across the orchard with heartbreaking innocence, stopping every pair of working hands. Eleanor stood motionless beneath branches heavy with red apples, her fingers tightening around the handle of her cane until her knuckles whitened. She had dreamed of hearing that voice again through countless lonely nights, yet now that the moment had arrived, fear rooted her to the earth. She feared the child would no longer know her. She feared hope itself. Theodore reached farther toward her, tiny tears gathering in his bright blue eyes. "Mama?" The second cry broke the last wall around Eleanor's heart. She slowly turned. For one suspended heartbeat, neither Adrian nor Eleanor moved. Golden leaves drifted between them while the restored watermill murmured softly in the distance. Then Eleanor crossed the orchard as quickly as her injured leg allowed. Her steps were uneven, her breathing trembled, yet nothing could stop her. Adrian knelt without speaking and carefully lowered Theodore into her waiting arms. The little boy clung to her neck as though he had never forgotten her scent. Eleanor buried her face against his soft hair, tears falling freely onto his tiny coat. She kissed his forehead again and again, whispering his name through broken sobs. Theodore touched her cheeks with curious little hands, smiling as if the missing part of his world had finally returned. Around them, villagers quietly removed their hats. Several women wiped away tears. Even the strongest laborers looked toward the ground, giving mother and son the privacy of their own silence. Adrian remained kneeling. Not because custom required it, because he no longer believed he deserved to stand before her. When Eleanor finally lifted her eyes, she found him still waiting with bowed head. "I have no excuse," Adrian said quietly. "Only truth." She remained silent. "I failed you as your husband before I failed you as your duke." His voice shook. "You saved my life. I repaid your sacrifice with exile." The orchard stood completely still. "I trusted forged papers more than the woman who gave up her own future so I could keep mine." He removed the gold wedding ring from his finger. For every day since Eleanor's banishment, he had worn it hidden beneath his gloves where no one else could see. He held it carefully in both hands before her. "I believed this estate was worthless." His eyes finally met hers. "I was wrong." He looked around at the blooming orchards, laughing children, restored cottages, and peaceful river before returning his gaze to Eleanor. "The only thing I nearly lost was you." No one breathed. Eleanor studied the face she had loved for years. Gone was the proud ruler who had pronounced judgment inside the great hall. Before her knelt only a broken man carrying unbearable regret. She could still remember the day he refused her final kiss with Theodore. She could still hear the carriage wheels carrying her toward Ravenmoor. Those memories would never disappear. Neither would the memory of the gentle young nobleman who once stayed awake 3 nights beside her hospital bed after she lost the use of her leg. Pain and love existed together inside her heart. Neither erased the other. "I cannot pretend nothing happened," she whispered. "I would never ask you to. I cannot return to the woman I was." "I know." She looked across Hope's Valley. "When I arrived here, I believed everything had been taken from me." Her eyes rested upon the school where children now laughed. "But I discovered something unexpected." She smiled softly. "A broken life can still become a beautiful one." Adrian lowered his head. "I don't ask you to return to Blackwood Manor." He paused before speaking again. "I ask permission to remain here." Several villagers exchanged surprised glances. "I wish to earn a place beside you, not because I am Duke, but because I am your husband, if someday you can accept me again." Eleanor searched his face for pride. She found none. Only humility. Only love. Only sorrow. Theodore laughed happily between them, unaware that his tiny embrace had already begun healing wounds no physician could ever mend. Slowly, Eleanor extended her hand. Not to accept the ring. To help Adrian stand. He looked at her with astonishment. "I forgive you," she said gently. Her next words carried greater weight. "But forgiveness is not forgetting." "I understand. It is choosing not to let yesterday destroy tomorrow." Adrian's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in many years, Eleanor stepped forward and embraced him. Theodore remained between them, wrapping one tiny arm around each parent while giggling at the unexpected closeness. The villagers erupted into joyful applause. Church bells rang across the valley as though the hills themselves celebrated. Life moved forward quickly after that day. Adrian never attempted to rule Hope's Valley through commands. Instead, he worked wherever labor was needed most. He repaired fences alongside farmers. He carried timber for new cottages. He listened to widows describe the hardships noble courts had never understood. People who had once feared the Duke slowly discovered the quiet man hidden beneath the title. Whenever anyone praised Eleanor for transforming Ravenmoor alone, she gently corrected them. No paradise is built by one pair of hands. Together they founded England's first free village school, where every child could learn regardless of birth or wealth. Eleanor personally taught reading while retired scholars volunteered lessons in mathematics, science, and history. Children who once expected lives of poverty began dreaming of becoming doctors, engineers, and teachers. Soon afterward they opened a hospital unlike any England had known. Instead of turning away wounded laborers and disabled veterans, the hospital welcomed them first. Doctors studied new methods of rehabilitation. Artificial braces and improved walking supports were designed inside village workshops. Watching injured men and women reclaim independent lives reminded Eleanor that disability never diminished human worth. She refused to let another person believe otherwise. Adrian established apprenticeship programs for orphaned boys and girls, ensuring every child learned a meaningful trade. Carpenters, blacksmiths, weavers, and millers accepted students without demanding payment. Widows received farmland instead of charity, allowing families to prosper through honest work rather than dependence. Workshops employing people with physical disabilities became the valley's greatest innovation. Men missing arms crafted elegant furniture using specially designed tools. Women unable to perform heavy labor embroidered magnificent textiles sought throughout England. Visitors arrived expecting pity and departed inspired by dignity. Hope's Valley flourished beyond imagination. The restored underground spring transformed surrounding fields into the richest farmland in northern England. Fruit from Ravenmoor orchards reached London's finest markets. Merchants traveled hundreds of miles hoping to understand how a place once dismissed as cursed had become a model for prosperity. They usually expected secret wealth. Instead they found kindness organized with wisdom. When Parliament invited Adrian to relocate these successful institutions nearer the capital, he politely declined. "The future of England," he answered, "belongs wherever compassion is practiced." His words spread throughout the nation. Several years later nobles, scholars, and community leaders gathered beneath flowering apple trees for the annual harvest celebration. Thousands filled the valley. Standing before the assembled crowd, Adrian turned toward Eleanor. Years earlier he had taken everything from her before witnesses. Now he wished to restore what honor could never fully repay. He spoke clearly enough for every voice to fall silent. "This valley taught me that greatness is never measured by castles, titles, or power." He smiled toward Eleanor. "It is measured by the lives we choose to lift." He gently placed a beautifully crafted silver medallion around her neck. "Before all gathered here, I proudly declare my wife Eleanor Blackwood." His voice carried across the orchards. "The Duchess of Hope." Thunderous applause echoed from hillside to hillside. Eleanor accepted the honor with quiet humility, thanking not herself but every villager who had refused to surrender when despair seemed easier. Spring returned once more. By 1892, Hope's Valley had become a place where blossoms covered every hillside, restored bridges crossed sparkling streams, children raced beside the turning watermill, and laughter echoed from cottages once abandoned to silence. Eleanor, now walking confidently with a single polished cane, wandered through blooming gardens while Adrian walked beside her carrying a basket of fresh apples. Ahead of them ran Theodore, now a bright 8-year-old boy whose kindness reflected both his mother's compassion and his father's hard-earned wisdom. A group of visitors paused near the orchard and asked Theodore how such an extraordinary place had come into existence. The young boy smiled proudly before looking back toward his parents. "My mother didn't inherit paradise," he said. "She created it." Adrian reached for Eleanor's hand, and this time she placed her fingers willingly within his. Together they watched the evening sun bathe Hope's Valley in warm golden light, where orchards blossomed, bells rang softly across the hills, and every smiling face stood as living proof that the greatest kingdoms are not built by power alone, but by forgiveness, courage, and a heart that refuses to stop believing even after it has been broken.